Hi everybody, my name is Terry and welcome back to Operation Overhaul. Now in the last episode we got the rather disappointing news that one of the suspension fork springs was broken. So while we're waiting for new ones to arrive, they're on order from AMOC, I thought I'd get in and do some repair work on the frame that I've been meaning to do for ages. Here's the pannier at the back on the left, and where I bodged it with tape here, you'll see when I peel it away that the metal is broken. So I thought, let's try and fix it. Why not? Well, one good reason why not is I've never welded anything in my life ever before. So I'm about to have my very first go at welding. Let's see how it works out. So here's the bodge that's got me this far. Basically a metal splint made of an old hinge and a bit of bodge tape. So first of all, I'm going to undo every nut and bolt that I can find that's holding this pannier frame to the bike. They're an interesting mixture of Whitworth, AF and metric. So you've got to be careful which spanner I'm using because it'd be easy to round a head off. Anyway, it takes about 10 minutes and off she comes, and then we can get it over to the workbench and really have a look at the damage and come up with some kind of plan. Now I've got a MIG welding kit. I've watched a few videos on the internet and I'm going to try very hard not to burn the house down. Before I have a go at the bike though, I get two old bits of metal and have a bit of a practice. By the way, I'm not going to tell you what MIG welding settings I'm using for this because I wouldn't want anyone to copy what I'm doing here.
My first ever weld. That is truly fucking horrible. I mean, it is welded together, but it is truly horrible. Alright, so I've turned down the wire speed, I've trimmed it. I'm going to file that off. I'm going to have a good go at cleaning it a bit better. And I'm going to go a little bit closer when I weld it next time.
So I practiced and practiced on offcuts of metal until I got half decent. And now I'm trying to prepare the pannier for the welding. And what I'm doing here is I'm filing it so that when the two bits of metal are together, there's a sort of a nice V shape for the weld to drop into. That's the theory anyway. Now I'm getting it as clean as I can, a bit of carb cleaner and paper, so that the exposed metal is as clean as I can get it. And now, against all good advice and wisdom, I'm going to actually give it a go. And you know what? It isn't too bad. I've got something that will hold the metal together and which I can grind back. So out comes the Dremel. And the sharper ones amongst you may have noticed that I've done the weld on the back of the pannier frame where no one can see it. Now I'm just going to go over all of the horrible bits with some araldite metal weld. So this is a two compound thing that you mix together and then apply it with a little spatula. I'm just using a little wooden skewer here. I find that easy because you can stir it with it as well. And then if you leave it 24 hours, it dries rock hard, and then you can just file it back. And once we've done that, actually we get a pretty good result, and we can tick off another job. On to the next thing then. So over the years I've noticed that there are little spots on the bike where the paint has either flaked away or where the little bits of rust are starting to appear. So it's time to get in and address all of those. Now what we're not trying to do is make the bike look pretty. What we want to do is have something that looks original, something that would be appropriate for army service. Now, back in the day, when these things got to a unit, they would be painted usually with a paintbrush by the soldiers with whatever they had to hand in roughly the right colour. So what I'm doing here to sort of match that is I'm going at anything that I think bears painting, going at it first with the Dremel to get it back to bare metal. And then I'll rub it down with a little bit of sandpaper, and then I'll get in there and put some primer on it, and then once the primer's dried, and I'll put 2 coats of primer on it, then I'm going to go in with some green paint and apply that using a paintbrush rather than spraying it. Now I do know that some people will take these bikes, remove the engine, get the frame all the way back to bare metal by sandblasting it, and then spray paint it or even powder coat it. And I'm not criticising that approach at all, but in a way this rough and ready approach is a bit more genuine in my view. Now the other thing is, why is this bike green? We know it was delivered to the Middle East at the end of 1941. After that, the history trail goes blank. It's almost impossible to work out where the bike went. And if anyone can tell you that they know where a War Department bike went, they really would have to have photographs and things that would match up. They're very, very difficult to trace the full history. And when they went into the workshops to get repaired, the engine and the frame would be separated when they went in. And the first frame out would be matched with the next engine out at the other end of the process. So engines and frames got chopped all the time. So this bike, we think, went to North Africa, and the soldiers there would have painted it in a sand colour, and I found evidence of that sand colour underneath on some parts of the frame. Then the history trail goes blank, and it turned up in France about 30 years ago, and that's where the previous owner rescued it from. So he painted it up in 7th Armoured Division colours, the Desert Rats, and why not? If you play the numbers game, many of the bikes probably went there, but the bike ended up in France. So I think it's a reasonable thing to assume that maybe it came through in the Italian campaign, and then when it got as far as southern France, it was just sort of dumped and ended up in civilian hands, where it was eventually rescued. So that's why I'm painting it green. That's why I'm leaving the 7th Armoured Division markings on it. But I am going to add something a little bit extra to personalise this bike to me, and I'll explain that once we get to looking at the fuel tank. But for now anyway, that's been a good use of time while we're waiting for spares to arrive. There's no sense sitting on our hands. We can get on and do the little easy things like this. And we can put another tick on the whiteboard. To the fuel tank now. And when I look at the front of the tank, which is quite exposed if you're riding in the rain, I can see that along the seam there, we're starting to get little signs of rust. So the idea here is I'm going to sand it back. Now, unfortunately, the colour of the tank is very slightly different to the colour of the frame. And if I were to use the paint that I've got on, actually on the tank, then it would look really, really odd. But I must address the rust. So the plan is I'm going to go in here, and once I've sanded it back, I'm actually going to paint this little bit here black, and I'm going to put like a line around the edge where I'm sanding here, and I think that will look in keeping with the bike if I'm careful and if I can do it neatly. So clearly I'm going to have to mask this off in order to get a nice clean edge. And the paint I'm using here is Hammerite Direct to Rust paint. No need for anything fancy. This, when it's the tank's on, it will sort of wrap around behind the forks. It's all dark back there anyway. I think the important thing is the nice clean line, and the contrast between the green and the black should look in keeping with the rest of the bike. So here I am unmasking it now. Let me know what you think. Is it a decent job, or have I botched it? Let me know in the comments. Now, some time ago, while mounting a camera on the handlebars, I inadvertently scratched the fuel tank at the top here, and I just took a little bit of chunk of the paint out. It's not damaged the metal, but it took a chunk of the paint out, and I can't match the paint. So I came up with a plan to try and turn this sort of minor disaster into something positive. So what I'm doing here is I'm filing back some filler that I've put in there so that I can get this as flat as humanly possible. And now what I'm going to do is I managed to get a sticker, a vehicle sticker, in the colours of the Royal Artillery. It would be what these days would be called the tactical shoulder flash. Now the colours of the Royal Artillery are red and blue, and the reason I've chosen the Royal Artillery is threefold really. So first of all, in 7th Armoured Division there were artillery regiments, and also my great-grandfather fought in the Royal Artillery during the First World War, and sadly he was killed in just 2 weeks before the armistice. Also, this bike, we think, went through the Italian campaign before it ended up in France. And my grandfather was on an air observation post squadron, so basically spotting for the Royal Artillery from Oster aircraft. So there we have three, I think, reasonable connections to the Royal Artillery. So what I'm going to do is put one of these Royal Artillery tactical flashes over the top of this damage, and if I do it neatly, then I think we've got something that's in keeping with the bike. Now, this wouldn't have been on the bike in wartime, and I completely acknowledge that. But every time I look down on it, I'm going to think about my great-grandfather and my grandfather and the history of the bike, and I kind of like that. So I bought the tactical flash. It's way too big to go on the tank. It would look out of place. It wouldn't even fit because of where the fuel cap is. So what I've done is I've made something which I think ought to be more or less the right size. I printed that off the internet. And then I've cut that down even further with just a blank bit of paper to what I think will look about right and appropriate. And now I'm going to take the sticker I bought, which nowadays would have been put on a Land Rover if they're a Royal Artillery unit, and I'm going to size that. And the good thing about this badge is it's completely scalable. So here I am, first of all, before I cut the proper sticker, I'm taking this little internet printout, and it turns out it's 3 inches by 3 inches. And because it's simply a square in 2 colours, it's completely scalable. So provided you measure it up carefully, you can make a really nice square, and it just scales down without losing any of its proportions. So once we've measured this up, I'll cut it out and I'll place it on the tank, and we'll have a look and we'll see if that looks appropriate or not. So here we are. I'll take my blank away and put my sort of simulated badge on there, more or less the right place. And as I do that, I see that the shape of the tank at the front gives me some good guidelines in order to keep it absolutely straight. So now I'm going to get some masking tape out, and I'm going to mark up the position and then test it with the blank again to see if that's going to be good enough to keep the real patch straight or not. And once I'm absolutely happy with that, I go to the real patch, which is oversized, measure it up to make sure it's 3 inches by 3 inches and that we scale it down so that we preserve the pattern exactly. And then I'll cut it out with a razor blade and we'll position it between the 2 lines of masking tape and see if we can get a good result. These badges aren't particularly expensive. I think there was about a tenner, and I've got 2. So that's good. I've got a bit of redundancy if I mess it up. And it came with a very patronising set of instructions that said, stop, think, don't put this onto a cold tank or in freezing conditions because the glue won't work, which I thought was a huge statement of bleeding obvious. But anyway, there we go. Right, so now I'm cleaning up the tank to make sure it's, and I'm using a sort of a silicone anti-grease wipe to do that, to give the adhesive the best possible chance. The garage is nice and warm. And then, as always with stickers, the idea is you start from one place and just gently sort of roll the backing off to try and eliminate any lumps or imperfections as you go. And there we are. I get it all the way back in line with the masking tape. And I think first time on, that looks pretty good. I think I could have made a better job of sanding the imperfection underneath. But when we look now at the final result, and what I'll see when I look down when I'm riding the bike, then I'm pretty pleased with that. So there we go, that's the frame and the tank looking a bit nicer and more importantly rust-proof. Join me next time when we'll really get into the mechanical work on the bike. I'll have the spare parts, we'll be putting gears in, we'll be doing all sorts of stuff. It'll be fantastic. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. Ride safely. See you next time.